The gym had its own rhythm, a predictable metronome of grunts and clanking iron. For 2 years, it had been my sanctuary and my purgatory, a place where I could sweat out the quiet desperation of my life, one rep at a time. My routine was my armor: treadmill, pull-downs, leg press, shower, home. I spoke to no one beyond a clipped nod to the guy at the front desk. I was a ghost in workout shorts, haunting the periphery, and that was exactly how I liked it. It was safer that way, less complicated. My life was a series of neat, sterile boxes. My apartment was minimalist to the point of being monastic. My job as a data analyst was a silent conversation with spreadsheets. My social life consisted of the mandatory weekly practice for a recreational basketball league I'd joined on a whim, a decision I regretted every Tuesday night when I had to engage in the hollow performance of team camaraderie. Even there, I was an outsider, the quiet guy who was decent at a three-point shot but useless at locker room banter. And then there was Marcus. Marcus Thorne was the captain of the team, the unofficial mayor of the gym, the sun around which all the other grunting, sweating planets seemed to orbit. He was everything I was not: confident, grounded, effortlessly social. He moved with an economy of motion that spoke of a deep comfort in his own skin. He didn't swagger. He simply occupied his space with an unshakable certainty. I had been watching him for the entire 2 years I'd been a member of this gym. It was a secret, painful hobby, a form of self-flagellation I couldn't seem to quit. I knew the way the muscles in his back coiled when he did pull-ups, the specific shade of his skin after a hard workout, flushed and damp. I knew the low, rumbling timbre of his laugh, a sound that always seemed to start deep in his chest. I knew he had a small, jagged scar just above his left eyebrow that was only visible when the light hit it right. I had cataloged these details like a starving man memorizing a menu. It was a pathetic, one-sided intimacy that left me feeling hollow and ashamed. He existed in my world as a vibrant, living thing, while I was almost certain I didn't exist in his at all. I was just another piece of equipment, another shadow in his peripheral vision. That day started like any other. I was on my last set of shoulder presses, my muscles screaming in protest, my mind blessedly blank. I was focused on the burn, the clean, simple pain that eclipsed all the other, more complicated aches. I re-racked the weights with a rattling finality and was reaching for my water bottle when a shadow fell over me. "Hey, Leo." The voice was low and familiar. Too familiar. My heart did a clumsy, painful lurch against my ribs. I turned slowly, my well-practiced mask of polite indifference sliding into place. It was him. Marcus. He was standing there in a gray tank top that was dark with sweat, a towel slung around his neck. He wasn't smiling, exactly, but the corners of his mouth were tilted in a way that suggested the possibility. "Marcus." I managed, my own voice sounding thin and reedy. "You got a minute?" he asked. My usual spotter bailed. "Need someone to watch my back on the bench." My brain short-circuited. For 2 years, he had worked out with the same two guys, loud, brawny men who communicated primarily through chest bumps and unintelligible grunts. He had never spoken to me beyond a perfunctory, "nice shot," during practice. And now he was here, asking me. It didn't make sense. The carefully constructed walls of my routine, the ones that kept me safe and invisible, were being breached. Yeah? Sure," I said, the words feeling foreign in my mouth. I felt a hot flush of anxiety creep up my neck. What if I messed it up? What if I dropped the bar on him? The potential for humiliation was astronomical. "Thanks. Appreciate it." He gave me a short, genuine smile that made the scar above his eye crinkle. It was like seeing a rare bird up close for the first time. I followed him over to the bench press, my legs feeling unsteady. The air around him smelled clean, like soap and effort. It was a scent I had only ever imagined from a distance. Now it was filling my lungs, making me dizzy. He lay down on the bench, his broad shoulders settling into the worn padding. He looked up at me, his eyes a serious, focused shade of brown. They were darker than I'd thought. "Just need you for the last couple reps. I'm going for a personal best." "Okay." I nodded, trying to look like this was a normal, everyday occurrence for me. I positioned myself behind him, my hands hovering near the bar, careful not to touch it yet. From this angle, I could see the powerful column of his neck, the way his dark hair was cut short and neat against his skin. I could hear the soft, controlled sound of his breathing. It was an intimacy so sudden and profound it felt like a violation. My violation of his space, of his trust. He wrapped his hands around the bar, his knuckles white. "Ready," he grunted. He pushed the bar off the rack, the muscles in his chest and arms flexing under the immense strain. I watched, mesmerized and terrified. He was a study in controlled power. The first rep was slow, deliberate. The second was harder, a low groan escaping his lips. His face was a mask of concentration, his jaw tight. On the third rep, the bar stalled halfway up. His arms trembled, the veins standing out in sharp relief. This was it. This was my purpose. My hands closed over the bar, my fingers brushing against his. His skin was warm, calloused, and shockingly real. I helped him guide the weight back onto the rack, the metal clanging loudly in the suddenly silent space around us. He sat up, his chest heaving. Sweat dripped from his temple, tracing a path down his jaw. He didn't look at me right away, just stared at his hands for a long moment, breathing deeply. Then, he turned his head, and his dark eyes met mine. The gym, the noise, the other people, it all faded away. There was an intensity in his gaze I couldn't decipher. It wasn't just gratitude. It was something else, something heavier. He swiped the back of his hand across his forehead and stood up, moving so he was standing directly in front of me. We were closer than we had ever been. I had to tilt my head back slightly to meet his eyes. He let out a slow breath. A ghost of that smile returned to his lips, but it didn't reach his eyes this time. His gaze was still locked on mine, probing, searching for something. Then he murmured, his voice a low vibration that seemed to travel straight through my chest. "Your turn." The words hung in the air between us, simple and yet loaded with a weight I couldn't begin to comprehend. My turn for what? My turn on the bench? Or something else entirely? The question echoed in the sudden, frantic pounding of my own heart. He didn't move. He just stood there, watching me, waiting. And for the first time in 2 years, I felt seen. It was the most terrifying and exhilarating feeling I had ever known. My throat was dry. I swallowed, the sound unnaturally loud to my own ears. I should have said something, anything. A simple no thanks or, "I'm done for the day," but the words wouldn't form. I was trapped in his orbit, caught by the gravity of his presence. That steady, unreadable gaze held me pinned. He was waiting for an answer, and I realized with a jolt of panic that this was a test. A threshold. My response mattered. "Okay," I heard myself say, the voice sounding like it belonged to someone else, someone braver. A flicker of something, satisfaction, relief, crossed his face before it was gone, replaced by that neutral, watchful expression. He gestured to the bench. "What's your max?" I don't usually max out," I stammered, feeling foolish. My workouts were about maintenance, not about pushing limits. They were about control, not about testing boundaries. "There's a first time for everything," he said. It wasn't a question. It was a statement of fact. He started pulling plates off the bar, the sound of the iron sliding off the steel echoing the frantic rhythm in my chest. He was recalibrating the weight for me, a task I always did myself. He seemed to know instinctively what I could handle, stripping it down to a weight that was challenging but achievable. How did he know that? Had he been watching me too? The thought was so absurd, so fundamentally at odds with my perception of my own invisibility, that I almost laughed. It was a wild, hopeful, terrifying idea. I lay down on the bench, the worn material still warm from his body. The scent of him, that clean, soap-and-sweat smell, was embedded in the padding. I inhaled it, and it felt like I was breathing in courage. I positioned my hands on the bar, my palms sweating. Marcus moved behind me, taking the same position I had taken for him. His proximity was a physical weight. I could feel the heat radiating from his body, could almost sense the solid presence of him at my back. It was distracting and grounding all at once. "Breathe, Leo," he said, his voice quiet, right by my ear. "Just focus on the push." I took a deep breath, filling my lungs. I lifted the bar from the rack. It felt heavier than it should have, weighted down by the significance of the moment. I lowered it slowly to my chest, my arms trembling slightly. I could feel his hands hovering just inches from the bar, a silent promise of support. He wasn't touching it, but I could feel him. Every nerve in my body was aware of him. Push. I drove the bar upwards, putting everything I had into the movement. It rose steadily, and for a second, I thought I had it. But then, Just like with him, it stalled. The weight became immense, impossible. My muscles screamed. Failure washed over me, hot and sharp. Before the panic could fully set in, his hands were there. They closed over the bar, strong and sure, his fingers once again brushing against mine. But this time, it was different. He didn't just help me rack it. His hands enveloped mine, his strength merging with my weakness, and together, we finished the rep. We pushed the bar all the way up, locking it out in a moment of shared victory, before guiding it safely back to the rack. I sat up, breathless, my heart hammering against my ribs. The physical exertion was nothing compared to the emotional overload. He hadn't just spotted me. He had participated. He had shared the strain, shared the success. He moved around the bench to stand in front of me again. A single bead of sweat rolled down my temple, and before I could react, he reached out and wiped it away with his thumb. His touch was feather-light, shockingly gentle. My skin burned where he had touched me. I froze, every muscle in my body tensing. He dropped his hand, his expression unreadable. "Good set," he said, his voice back to that low, even tone. And then he turned and walked away. I just sat there on the bench, my body humming with a strange new energy. I watched him cross the gym floor, retrieve his bag from a locker, and walk out the door without a backward glance. The gym's familiar rhythm rushed back in to fill the void he left behind. The clank of weights, the drone of the treadmills, the mindless pop music from the overhead speakers. But nothing was the same. Something had been fundamentally altered. He had crossed a line, stepped into my carefully curated solitude, and left his fingerprints all over it. For the rest of the week, I was a wreck. I replayed the entire encounter in my head on a continuous loop, analyzing every word, every gesture, every fractional change in his expression. "Your turn." The words haunted me. The gentle brush of his thumb against my skin was a phantom sensation I felt 100 times a day. I tried to dismiss it. He needed a spotter. I was there. It was that simple. He was a tactile person. Wiping away sweat was a meaningless, friendly gesture. It was that simple. But my heart, that traitorous organ, refused to believe in simplicity. It insisted on complexity, on subtext, on hope. The next Tuesday, I walked into basketball practice with a sense of dread so thick it felt like I was wading through water. I was terrified of seeing him. What would I say? How should I act? Would he ignore me, confirming that the gym incident was a meaningless one-off? That would be worse, somehow, than any awkwardness. To be given that brief, intoxicating glimpse of being seen, only to be plunged back into invisibility, felt unbearable. I saw him as soon as I walked in. He was at the far end of the court, effortlessly sinking free throws. He was in his element, the undisputed king of this small wooden kingdom. He hadn't seen me yet. I took a deep breath and tried to casually start my warm-up stretches, hoping to blend into the background as usual. It didn't work. A few moments later, a basketball rolled to a stop right by my feet. I looked up. Marcus was jogging toward me, a neutral expression on his face. "Leo," he said, nodding a greeting. It was perfectly normal, perfectly casual. My anxiety-riddled brain screamed in frustration. "Hey," I replied, my voice disappointingly steady. I passed the ball back to him. He caught it easily in one hand. "How are the shoulders?" "Not too sore from the other day." The question was so unexpected, so considerate. It implied he had thought about me, about our interaction, after it was over. The hope I had been trying to squash flared up again, fierce and painful. "No, they're fine," I said, maybe a little too quickly. Felt good, actually. "Yeah." He bounced the ball once, the sound echoing in the cavernous gym. "You've got good form. You just don't push yourself." He said it like a diagnosis. He saw me. He saw my potential and my hesitation. He saw the way I held myself back. He spun the basketball on his finger, his gaze distant for a moment. "We've got that tournament in Westfield next month. The team's staying over Saturday night. You driving up on your own?" The change in topic was jarring. Yeah, I was planning to. "My car's in the shop," he said, finally looking at me again. "Crankshaft went." "It's a whole thing," he paused. "I was going to ask if I could catch a ride with you." My mind went completely blank. Marcus Thorne wanted to ride with me. For 3 hours. In the enclosed, intimate space of my Honda Civic. It was a preposterous idea. He could ask anyone. Literally anyone else on the team would have jumped at the chance to play chauffeur to the captain. Why me? Unless you've got other plans, he added, a slight edge to his voice, as if he was already bracing for rejection. No, no plans, I rushed to say. Yeah, of course. That's fine. Cool. He gave me that small, almost smile again. I'll text you the details. He turned and jogged back to the free throw line, leaving me standing there, my world tilting on its axis for the second time in a week. The weeks leading up to the tournament were a strange dance of proximity and distance. At the gym, our routines began to overlap more and more. It was never spoken, but it became an unspoken agreement. We'd arrive around the same time, work out on opposite sides of the weight room, but always end up spotting each other on our final sets. The conversations were brief, limited to weights and reps. Two more, you got this, nice push, but underneath the sparse words, a current of something else was flowing. I became hyper-aware of him, my senses tuned to his presence. I knew he was there before I even saw him, a subtle shift in the gym's energy. I'd feel his eyes on me from across the room while I was on the cable machine, and when I'd glance over, he'd be looking right at me, his expression unreadable, before he'd look away and take a sip from his water bottle. It was maddening. He gave me nothing and everything all at once. The touches became more frequent, but they were always plausible. A hand brushing my back as he passed behind me. Excuse me, his knuckles grazing mine as we adjusted a pin on a weight stack. A firm, steadying hand on my shoulder as I was stretching. Each one was a tiny explosion on my skin, leaving a lingering heat. I was starving, and he was feeding me breadcrumbs. I devoured every one and hated myself for it. My internal monologue was a frantic, desperate attempt to connect the dots. Was this just how he was? Friendly? Physically demonstrative? Or was it specific to me? I had started watching him interact with others, searching for clues. He was friendly, yes. He'd clap guys on the back, engage in easy banter. But the quiet intensity, the lingering looks, the small, almost imperceptible touches, those seemed to be reserved for me. Or was I just imagining it? Was I projecting my own desperate yearning onto his perfectly innocent actions? The night before the tournament, he texted me. Hotel got the room reservation wrong. They've got us sharing one room. Hope that's cool. My heart stopped. One room. 2 beds, surely. But still, one room. The thought of that much sustained proximity was both thrilling and terrifying. Yeah, no problem, I texted back, my fingers trembling so hard I had to type it 3 times. Cool. See you tomorrow at 8, he replied instantly. I didn't sleep that night. I just lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, my mind racing. I was walking into a situation I couldn't control, and for someone who had built his life around control, it was unnerving. I was about to spend more than 24 hours straight with the one person who could dismantle my carefully constructed defenses with a single look. I felt like I was walking into the eye of a storm. The drive to Westfield was excruciatingly quiet at first. I had spent the morning cleaning my car with a meticulousness that bordered on pathological, as if a pristine interior could somehow make up for my own internal chaos. Marcus had shown up right at 8, throwing a duffel bag in my trunk and sliding into the passenger seat with an easy grace that I envied. He smelled like coffee and mint. Nice car, he said, running a hand over the dashboard. Clean. Thanks, I mumbled, pulling out of my apartment complex. We drove for the first 20 minutes in a silence that felt thick and heavy. I had the radio on low, some anonymous indie band murmuring about heartbreak. I was gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles were white. My mind was a frantic Rolodex of potential conversation starters, all of them seeming impossibly lame. So you like sports? He broke the silence. You're quiet. It wasn't an accusation, just an observation. Sorry, I said instinctively. Don't be sorry, he said, his voice soft. He was looking out the window, at the blur of trees lining the highway. It's just an observation. You're quiet at practice, too. At the gym. You just kind of exist in the background. He turned to look at me then, his gaze direct. I wonder what you're thinking about. The question was so direct, so personal, it stole the air from my lungs. Spreadsheets, I said, trying for a joke. It fell completely flat. He didn't laugh. He just kept looking at me. I don't believe that. I risked a glance at him. His expression was serious, open. He was genuinely curious. He wanted to know. The realization was staggering. I overthink things, I admitted, the confession feeling like a monumental act of vulnerability. My brain doesn't really have an off switch. What do you overthink about? He pressed, his voice gentle. Everything, I said with a humorless laugh. What to eat for dinner. Whether I locked the door. Whether I'm going to get fired for a typo in an email. I paused. Whether someone asking me for a ride is just being polite, or if there's another reason. The words were out before I could stop them. My face burned with humiliation. I had said too much. I had exposed the frantic, needy hamster wheel of my mind. I expected him to laugh, or get weird, or change the subject. But he just nodded slowly, a thoughtful expression on his face. Yeah, he said, so quietly I almost didn't hear him. I get that. He didn't elaborate. He just turned back to look out the window, but the silence that followed was different. It wasn't empty or awkward anymore. It was comfortable, companionable. We had shared something, a small piece of mutual understanding. He had seen a glimpse of the chaos inside me and hadn't recoiled. We checked into the hotel, a generic chain place that smelled of lemon-scented cleaner and stale air. And as I had feared and hoped, the room had 2 double beds, separated by a flimsy-looking nightstand. The space felt impossibly small with him in it. He dropped his bag on the bed farthest from the door and started unzipping it. I'm going to grab a shower before we have to meet the team for dinner, he said, pulling out a towel. Okay, I said, sitting on the edge of my own bed, feeling like an intruder in a scene from someone else's life. The sound of the shower starting was a low hiss that filled the room. I was alone, but his presence was everywhere. His jacket was thrown over a chair, his shoes were by the door, his duffel bag lay open on the bed. I was in his space, a space more intimate than his home. It was a temporary domesticity that made my heart ache with a longing so sharp it was a physical pain. He came out of the bathroom a few minutes later, a cloud of steam billowing out behind him. He had a towel slung low around his hips, and another one was ruffling his wet hair. Droplets of water clung to his shoulders and chest, catching the light from the cheap hotel lamp. My mouth went dry. I had seen him shirtless at the gym, of course, but this was different. This wasn't public or performative. This was private, vulnerable. He saw me looking and stopped, his hand stilling in his hair. Our eyes met, and the air in the room crackled with a sudden, palpable tension. The sound of the bathroom fan, the distant hum of the ice machine in the hall, it all faded away. There was only the space between us, charged and electric. His gaze dropped from my eyes, traveled down my body, and then came back up to meet mine again. It was a slow, deliberate appraisal. He wasn't trying to hide it. My heart was beating a frantic, wild rhythm against my ribs. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't move. This was it. The tipping point. The moment where ambiguity would be forced to collapse into certainty, one way or another. He took a step toward me. And then his phone, lying on the nightstand, buzzed loudly, shattering the moment. He blinked, as if waking from a trance. The intensity in his eyes vanished, replaced by a flicker of what? Frustration? He glanced at the phone, then back at me, a muscle twitching in his jaw. It's, the team, he said, his voice rough. Dinner's in 15. He turned away and started getting dressed, his back to me. The moment was gone. The bubble of tension had burst, leaving a residue of awkwardness and unspoken questions. I had been standing on the edge of a cliff, and he had pulled me back at the last second. Or maybe the phone had. I didn't know which was worse. Dinner with the team was a loud, boisterous affair at a generic sports bar. I sat at the end of the long table, nursing a beer, feeling more invisible than ever. The easy camaraderie of the other players, the shared jokes and backslapping, only highlighted my own isolation. I felt like I was watching it all from behind a thick pane of glass. Marcus sat at the other end of the table, holding court as the captain. He was in his element, laughing, telling stories, seamlessly navigating the social currents. He didn't look at me once. It was as if the moment in the hotel room had never happened. The thought was a cold knot in my stomach. I had imagined it. The intensity, the charged silence, it was all a product of my own wishful thinking. He had come out of the bathroom. I had stared, and he had been polite enough not to call me out on my pathetic, obvious crush. I felt a familiar wave of shame wash over me. I was a fool. I had built a fantasy out of a handful of breadcrumbs, and now reality was setting in. I excused myself, mumbling something about needing some air, and escaped to the cool night outside. I was leaning against the brick wall of the restaurant, trying to get my breathing under control, when the door opened and Marcus stepped out. "You okay?" he asked, his voice low. "Yeah, fine. Just needed a minute," I said, not looking at him. I stared across the parking lot at the flickering neon sign of a motel. He came to stand beside me, leaning against the wall, our shoulders almost touching. We stood in silence for a long moment. The sounds of the restaurant, the laughter, the clatter of plates, were muffled through the thick wooden door. "You know," he said finally, his voice quiet and serious, "for someone who claims to overthink everything, you're not very good at reading a room." I turned to look at him, confused. What's that supposed to mean? He met my gaze, his expression unreadable in the dim light. Back in the hotel room, before my phone went off, he paused, letting the words hang in the air. "That wasn't nothing, Leo." My heart started that familiar, frantic hammering. I don't know what you're talking about." I lied, my voice weak. A faint, humorless smile touched his lips. "Yeah, you do." He pushed himself off the wall to face me, blocking my view of the parking lot, of anything but him. "I'm not subtle. I thought I was being obvious. The gym, the ride, the room. I've been trying to get your attention for months." The confession was so direct, so completely at odds with the ambiguous dance we had been doing, that my brain couldn't process it. "My attention? Why?" "Because I like you," he said, his voice dropping to a near whisper. "Because you're quiet, and you watch everything, and you have this whole world going on behind your eyes, and I want to know what it is. Because when you think no one is looking, you have the saddest damn smile I've ever seen, and I want to be the reason it's not sad anymore." Every word was a blow, dismantling the fortress I had built around my heart. He saw me. He saw all of it. The loneliness, the watching, the quiet desperation. And he wasn't repulsed. He was drawn to it. I couldn't speak. I could only stare at him, my mind reeling, a torrent of fear and hope and disbelief crashing through me. He took a small step closer, closing the remaining distance between us. He raised a hand, his fingers hesitating for a fraction of a second before they came to rest on the side of my face, his thumb stroking my cheekbone. His touch was electric, grounding. It was real. This was real. "So," he murmured, his eyes searching mine. "Is it my turn yet?" The question, a direct echo of that first day at the gym, unlocked something inside me. The fear, the doubt, the years of lonely yearning. It all coalesced into a single, overwhelming need. I gave a shaky, almost imperceptible nod. That was all the permission he needed. He leaned in, and his mouth met mine. The first contact was soft, hesitant, a question. His lips were warm and firm. It wasn't a Hollywood kiss, full of fire and passion. It was quiet, and careful, and breathtakingly gentle. It was a kiss that said, "I see you. Are you sure?" I answered by leaning into him, my hand coming up to rest on his chest. I could feel the steady, solid beat of his heart under my palm. It was a rhythm that matched the frantic pounding of my own. The kiss deepened, my lips parting under the gentle pressure of his. He tasted faintly of beer and something else, something that was just him. The scrape of his evening stubble against my skin was a rough, grounding texture. He made a low sound in the back of his throat, and his other hand came up to cup the back of my neck, his fingers tangling in my hair, holding me to him. This wasn't for show. This wasn't a performance. This was honest and real, and it was happening to me. Outside a sports bar in Westfield, leaning against a brick wall, I was being kissed by Marcus Thorne. The absurdity and the perfection of the moment were staggering. When he finally pulled back, we were both breathless. He rested his forehead against mine, his eyes closed. His thumb was still making slow, soothing circles on my cheek. "Okay," he breathed out, a single, satisfied word. "Okay," I echoed, my voice a hoarse whisper. We didn't go back into the restaurant. He texted the team, saying I wasn't feeling well, and he was taking me back to the hotel. It was a simple, protective lie that felt more intimate than the kiss itself. He took my hand as we walked across the parking lot, his fingers lacing through mine. His hand was large and warm, and it felt like for the first time in my life, I was anchored. Back in the room, the awkwardness was gone, replaced by a humming, nervous energy. We stood in the middle of the room, still holding hands, like two teenagers on a first date. "So," I said, my voice still shaky, "this is new." He squeezed my hand. Is it a good new? Yeah, I said, a real, genuine smile finally breaking through. It's a very good new. We didn't talk much after that. The words felt clumsy and inadequate compared to the silent understanding that now existed between us. He led me over to his bed, and we sat on the edge, side by side. He didn't let go of my hand. I found myself studying our joined hands, the way my pale, slender fingers looked against his tanned, calloused ones. We fit. He eventually released my hand, but only to wrap his arm around my shoulders, pulling me against his side. I leaned my head on his shoulder, the scent of his soap and his skin filling my senses. He was so solid, so warm. It felt like coming home to a place I'd never been before. We sat like that for what felt like hours, just breathing in the quiet space we had created. Later, he stood up and pulled back the covers on his bed. He looked at me, a silent question in his eyes. My heart stuttered. I had no idea what the protocol was for this. My experience with this kind of intimacy was precisely zero. He must have seen the panic in my eyes, because his expression softened. Just sleep, Leo, he said gently. It's okay. Just stay. The relief was so immense it almost made me weak. He wasn't pushing for more. He was just offering closeness. Presence. I nodded, and he turned down the covers on my bed as well. We got into our respective beds, the small lamp on the nightstand casting a warm, soft glow over the room. For a while, we just lay there, the space between the beds feeling like a vast chasm. I could hear him breathing, a slow, steady rhythm in the quiet room. I was acutely aware of him, of his body just a few feet from mine. Marcus, I whispered into the darkness. Yeah, his voice came back, low and soft. Thank you. I heard the rustle of sheets. For what? For seeing me. There was a long pause. Then, go to sleep, Leo. It was a command, but it was the gentlest one I had ever heard. I woke up slowly, drifting up from a deep, dreamless sleep. The first thing I registered was the light. A sliver of pale morning sun was cutting through a gap in the cheap hotel curtains. The second thing I registered was warmth. A heavy, comforting warmth along my entire back. My eyes snapped open. I wasn't in my bed. Sometime during the night, I had ended up in his. Or he had ended up in mine. The details were fuzzy, lost to sleep. But the reality was this. I was lying on my side, and Marcus was spooned behind me, his arm draped possessively over my waist, his chest pressed firmly against my back. His breathing was a slow, even puff of warm air against my neck. Panic, cold and sharp, shot through me. This was too much, too fast. My mind, my old, familiar enemy, started screaming. What now? What does this mean? He's going to wake up and regret this. He's going to feel trapped. You need to get out of this bed before he wakes up. I tried to move, to inch away from him, but his arm tightened around me, pulling me closer. He mumbled something in his sleep, a low, incoherent sound, and buried his face in the space between my shoulder and neck. He was solid and real, and pinning me in place with his casual, sleeping strength. My panic subsided, replaced by a wave of something else, something warm and terrifyingly close to joy. I lay perfectly still, my heart pounding, and let myself feel it. The weight of his arm, the heat of his body, the soft tickle of his breath on my skin. For so long, my only physical contact had been accidental brushes with strangers on the subway or the sterile, professional handshake of a coworker. This deliberate, sustained, unconscious closeness was a language my body had forgotten how to speak. I don't know how long I lay there, trapped in content, before his breathing pattern changed. I felt him stir behind me, his body tensing as he slowly woke up. This was the moment of truth, the morning after reckoning. I held my breath, bracing myself for the inevitable awkwardness, the hasty retreat, the polite but firm creation of distance. He didn't move away. Instead, his hand, which had been resting on my stomach, began to move. His thumb stroked a slow, lazy circle on the thin cotton of my t-shirt. It was a conscious, deliberate touch. "Morning," he murmured, his voice thick with sleep, the vibration rumbling through my back. "Morning," I managed to choke out, my own voice a croak. He was quiet for a moment. I could feel him watching the back of my head. "I woke up," he said slowly, "and I was here. And my first thought wasn't, oh crap, it was good." The simple, honest confession was a balm to every raw nerve in my body. The fear that had been coiled in my stomach for hours, for years, finally began to unwind. I let out a breath I didn't realize I had been holding. Mine too, I whispered. He squeezed me gently, a silent affirmation. We lay like that for a few more minutes, in a comfortable, easy silence. The panic was gone. The overthinking was gone. For the first time in my adult life, my brain was quiet. There was only the warmth, the weight of him, the simple reality of this shared space. Eventually, the need for coffee and the impending reality of our basketball game forced us to move. The process of getting up and getting dressed was awkward. We were suddenly shy, avoiding direct eye contact, moving around each other in the small room with a careful, stilted choreography. The easy intimacy of the bed had evaporated in the full light of day, leaving us unsure of the new rules. We made it through the game in a haze. We won, apparently. I barely remember playing. My entire being was focused on him. We moved around each other on the court with a new awareness. A simple pass from him to me felt loaded with meaning. When he clapped me on the shoulder after I sank a three-pointer, the touch lingered long after his hand was gone. Our teammates didn't seem to notice anything, lost in their own world of competition and adrenaline. But for me, the game was just background noise to the silent, charged conversation happening between me and Marcus. The drive home was the real test. Would we revert to the awkward silence of the drive up? Or would we be able to find our way back to the easy comfort of the previous night? He got in the car, buckled his seatbelt, and immediately reached over, placing his hand on my thigh. It was a simple, proprietary gesture. A claim. My entire leg tingled. "Okay," he asked, his eyes on my face. "Okay," I said, my voice steadier this time. I placed my own hand over his, lacing our fingers together on my leg. He smiled, a real, full smile that reached his eyes and made the scar crinkle. Good. We drove the whole way back like that, his hand a warm, constant pressure on my leg, our fingers intertwined. We talked. Not about anything important. We talked about bad movies, about our terrible jobs, about the best place to get pizza in the city. It was easy, normal. And in its normality, it was the most extraordinary conversation of my life. I learned that his favorite color was green, that he hated cilantro, and that he had a ridiculously encyclopedic knowledge of 90s hip-hop. I told him about my secret ambition to be a writer, a dream I had never spoken aloud to another living soul. He didn't laugh. He just listened, and then he said, "You should." I'd read it. When we pulled up outside my apartment building, I felt a pang of sadness. I didn't want it to end. The car had become our bubble, a safe space where this new, fragile thing between us could exist without the interference of the outside world. I killed the engine, and we sat in the sudden silence. "So," he said, his voice quiet. He unlaced his fingers from mine, but left his hand on my leg. "What happens now?" The question hung in the air, full of all my fears. What happens now? Do we go back to our separate lives? Do we pretend this weekend was a strange, isolated incident? Does he go back to his world, and I go back to mine? The old anxieties, the familiar whispers of self-doubt, began to creep back in. This was a fluke, a moment of weakness or curiosity on his part. It couldn't last. "I don't know," I said honestly, the words tasting like defeat. He was quiet for a long moment, studying my face. I couldn't meet his eyes. I stared at the steering wheel, at my own hands, at anything but him. Then he said, "Here's what I think happens now." He reached into the pocket of his jeans and pulled out a single, solitary key. It was worn, the brass faded. He held it out to me in his open palm. I stared at it. "What's this?" "It's the key to my apartment," he said, his voice even and steady. "I think you should take it. For when you're tired of overthinking things alone in your own place. Or for when you just want to come over and not talk at all. Or for whatever you want." He closed his fingers around the key and pressed it into my palm. His hand was warm around mine. "I think what happens now is we figure it out. Together." I looked from the key in my hand to his face. He looked nervous. For the first time since I'd met him, Marcus Thorne, the unshakable captain, looked vulnerable. He was waiting for my answer, his heart in his eyes. He had built a bridge across the chasm that separated our worlds, and now he was waiting to see if I would be brave enough to walk across it. The fear was still there, a small, cold knot of it in my stomach. The fear of being hurt, of this not working out, of my own inadequacy. But for the first time, it was overshadowed by something else. Hope. A bright, fierce, terrifying hope. I closed my fingers around the warm metal of the key. Okay, I said. And this time, the word felt like a promise. Let's figure it out. The relief that washed over his face was so profound it was like watching the sun break through the clouds. He leaned across the console and gave me a kiss that was short and sweet and full of promises. The weeks that followed were a quiet revelation. Our relationship didn't unfold in grand, cinematic gestures. It was built in the small, mundane moments. It was me, using his key for the first time, my hand shaking as I let myself into his apartment while he was at work. It was finding he had cleared a drawer for me in his dresser without me having to ask. It was him showing up at my door after a long day with takeout, because he knew I'd forget to eat. We found our rhythm. Some nights we would talk for hours, sprawled on his comfortable, worn-out couch, slowly excavating the stories of our lives. Other nights, we would just exist in the same space, him reading a book, me tapping away on my laptop, the comfortable silence a testament to our growing intimacy. I was finally writing again, clumsy first drafts of stories I never thought I'd have the courage to tell. He would read them and offer quiet, thoughtful feedback that was always encouraging and surprisingly insightful. We didn't tell the team, not at first. At practice and at the gym, we reverted to our old dynamic, with a few subtle differences. The looks lingered a little longer. The casual touches had a new, secret meaning. It was our secret, a private world we had built for ourselves, and I wasn't ready to share it. I was still scared of the judgment, of the dynamic shifting, of our fragile new beginning being trampled by the outside world. Marcus understood. He never pushed. He let me set the pace, guarding my comfort with a quiet, steady protectiveness that made me feel safer than I had ever felt in my life. One evening, about a month after the tournament, I was at his place, making dinner. He was sitting at his small kitchen table, watching me. I was chopping vegetables, the rhythmic thud of the knife on the cutting board a soothing sound. "You're happy," he said. It wasn't a question. I stopped chopping and looked at him. He was smiling that soft, gentle smile that was reserved just for me. "Yeah," I said, the admission easy and natural. "I am. It's a good look on you," he said. That sad smile is gone. I put down the knife and walked over to him. I leaned down and gave him a slow, lingering kiss. "That's your fault," I murmured against his lips. "I'll take the blame," he said, pulling me onto his lap. I wrapped my arms around his neck, settling into his embrace. This was it. This was the quiet intimacy, the simple domesticity I had never allowed myself to even dream of. It wasn't loud or dramatic. It was the steady, reassuring presence of another person. It was the feeling of being known, truly and completely, and not just being accepted, but being wanted. I rested my head on his shoulder, breathing in his familiar scent. I thought back to the lonely, invisible man I had been just a few months ago, the ghost haunting the edges of the gym. It felt like a lifetime away. My life was no longer a series of neat, sterile boxes. It was messy and complicated and vibrant and inextricably tangled with his. He had seen me when I thought I was invisible. He had pushed me when I was afraid to move. He had offered me a key, a space, a future. He had waited, patiently, for it to be my turn. And as I sat there in his arms, in the quiet warmth of his kitchen, with the smell of garlic and onions in the air and the steady beat of his heart against my chest, I knew, with a certainty that settled deep in my bones, that I had finally come home.